So we all know narrower bars are faster and taller wheels are faster, but which one will add more speed to you? We are here today in the ARC wind tunnel in Indianapolis, Indiana with the fine folks at Silca to test exactly that. Now, yes, you can go to extremes, such as our man Dylan Johnson is here testing 19 centimeter bars, but I'm testing real world stuff. I've got a stock Salsa Warbird with 46 bars center to center, and I'm going to test a pair of 42s to see how much of a difference taking 2 centimeters off either side it makes. Similarly, I'm going to swap in a pair of 45 mil deep rims to see how much adding 2 centimeters to either wheel makes. Does aerodynamics even matter in gravel, man? Well, yeah. For gravel, yes, the speeds are slower and there's more rolling resistance than on the road, but aerodynamic drag is absolutely still a factor. Often, wind tunnel measurements you see quoted are done at 40 or 50 kilometers an hour because drag increases dramatically as speed ramps up. We're testing at 20 miles an hour because 20 miles an hour or slightly above is what I've done in 100-mile gravel races, like Steamboat Gravel, Unbound Gravel, the Mid-South this year. We're going to test at 0 and at 2.5 and see which one of these changes makes a bigger difference. I got the opportunity to test in this tunnel thanks to Josh Portner of Silca. Josh was a longtime technical director at Zip, and he still works with a number of World Tour teams and athletes on optimizing their mechanical setups. So Josh, how many hours do you think you've spent at wind tunnels over the years?
I stopped counting at 1,000, and so it's probably in the 1,200, 1,300 range, but so a lot.
You spent a number of years with Zip doing a lot of
Yep.
wheel-specific testing, but you've tested bars, bikes, all sorts of things.
Yeah, I mean, we did the first aero crank at Zip. We worked with, we were one of the first companies to go to the tunnel with Cervelo when they were a super new company, and so we've done a ton of work there with them. In like kind of the modern Silca, my Silca world, part of our company is called Aeromind, and we do a lot of development for frame manufacturers, for pro teams. We do a lot of positioning, some strategy work, and so yeah, we've done tunnel testing with probably half a dozen World Tour teams over the last 10 years, and then now we're working a lot with a bunch of gravel guys, so Dylan and Alexi and those folks, and trying to figure out, because gravel's a whole new world, right? Everything's broken. The tires are big, the bikes are different, and the speeds are slower, and so we're always trying to find that sweet spot of aerodynamics to rolling resistance and kind of where those crossover points happen to get the fastest combination for the event.
Are you still surprised by things that you discover in the wind tunnel?
Yeah, every single test you learn something. You're like, well, shit, we never thought that would happen. We actually just had one of those like 30 minutes ago with the Lao fork. The Lao fork turned out to be faster than the stock fork on this bike, even though every one of us, myself included, was, we were taking guesses on how many watts slower it would be, and I think it was like 5 watts faster. So yeah, you're always surprised by something, it seems like.
And that's why you test, right?
That's why you test.
Hunches are fine and good, but data is something different entirely.
And we say, the tunnel is challenging because it will tell you what the answer is, but not the why. And so oftentimes, we're getting ahead of ourselves with this is going to be faster because of this and that and the other thing, and that's all just guessing. It's typically when you are surprised, it's your mental model is just the wrong one, but you still aren't being told what the right mental model should be, and so that's where we then kind of form a new hypothesis, and then we'll go about okay, well, if that wasn't the reason, maybe this is the reason, and then hopefully you can design some experiments to figure out what the real cause and effect is.
Knowing that you're still often surprised at things that you discover, are there some rules of thumb that you've learned over the years about like where the tipping point is between wind resistance being the biggest factor and rolling resistance being the biggest factor, in terms of speed on road and on gravel?
On the road, it's a much bigger factor because the average speeds are higher, and so you've got this effect where your rolling resistance and your drivetrain friction, those are affected linearly by speed, right? So twice the speed, twice the rolling resistance losses, but your power to overcome aero drag climbs at the cube of the airspeed, and so that one is a lot trickier for people. And so maybe it doesn't matter at 18, but it starts to matter a lot at 20. And I think we've all been there. You start to do the math on, like, okay, I can ride 24, but to go 26 is like much, much harder. While you do the quick math and realize, yeah, that's, because your aero drag is going crazy, even though your rolling frictions and your drivetrain frictions are only slightly increasing. So I'd say for most people, it's probably in that 17, 18 mile an hour range is where they start to become aero dominated. And that's why, gravel racing, I mean, you just look at, we were at, I wasn't there. Where were these guys last weekend?
The Mid-South.
The Mid-South. I think the average speed at Mid-South this year was
23 miles an hour.
23 miles an hour.
Yeah.
And that's including like some of the choke points and stoppages for like water crossings and things. And so, the actual average rolling speed was probably somewhere in the 24 to 25 mile an hour range. Like that's a very aero-dominated regime until the surface gets very, very rough, right? And so, we're also trying to figure out, it's just different for these guys than for, I don't know about you, you're pretty fast, but certainly for me, I'm struggling to go 16, 17 miles an hour. That's almost for sure rolling resistance dominated. But for these guys, yeah, the aero, I'm not gonna say it's everything, but it's huge. It's the 80% of things.
Perfect. Thanks, sir. Okay, now I'm back in Boulder. Wind tunnel time is precious, it turns out. If you want to jump straight to the results and the takeaways, you can do so with the chapters below. But first, I'd like to give you a little context as to what these numbers mean and why. The first step with data is answering the why do I care part. And with Paris-Roubaix coming up this weekend, I was thinking back to some folks at Specialized trying to convince a certain athlete named Tom Bonin that he should perhaps consider going a little narrower with his handlebars and a little taller with his wheels. In the winter of 2011, a few of us at Specialized joined Olympic coach Neil Henderson to go to a velodrome in Valencia, Spain with Tom Bonin to test, guess what? At this point, Bonin had been riding 46 centimeter bars to very good success. He had already won Roubaix 3 times at this point, and there he'd also been using the traditional box section rims. Tom was testing a couple of things to see what was fastest at the same power output in his same position. You can test in wind tunnels versus on track. That's a whole other can of worms, rabbit hole we won't go down now to mix metaphors. But the idea was the same. See what was faster, a wider bar or a narrower bar, shallow rims or deeper rims. At Paris-Roubaix the following year in 2012, guess what Bonin used? You know it. Slightly narrower bars, he went down to a 44, and taller rims with the Zip 303s. He was solo the last 50 or more kilometers and averaged something like 44.5 kilometers an hour to win his 4th and final Paris-Roubaix. And yes, obviously, Bonin had way more power than the rest of us will ever have and was going far faster than most of us will do in the best of circumstances on smooth pavement. The Roubaix is an interesting one for many reasons. One is the mixed surfaces, right? Are you wanting to optimize for smooth pavement or for the rough cobbles? Because you've got to race on both. And it's a grandiose version of what many of us cogitate about with gravel, of like, well, do I want to have a smooth rolling setup for the paved parts of a race like Steamboat Gravel, of which there's a lot, or Belgian Waffle Ride, of which there's even more? Or do I want to make sure I'm not flatting on the chunky stuff? It's just fun to think about. And while most of us don't have access to Olympic coaches like Neil Henderson or wind tunnels, thanks to Josh Portner, we do have access to a few neat tools, which I'm going to point you to so you can plug in your own variables and make some choices about what could be fastest for you. And then you take that and bounce it against what is most comfortable for you, right? Because that's part of the equation. We know that a Graham Obrey-like position, something like Dylan was testing in the wind tunnel in Indy, yes, faster on paper. Are you going to ride that? No. So that's part of the balancing act of cycling. What makes it so fun is to balance these variables of what is fastest in a tunnel or fastest on a rolling resistance measuring drum, and then what the real world situation is. So let's dig into some of these tools. When you're on a bike, you've got 3 things working against you, aside from just Father Time. You've got the air, which is usually the biggest thing, especially as speeds ramp up. You've got rolling resistance, your tires and the ground surface, and then you've got your drivetrain efficiency. There are lots of variables and the devils are in the many details. So to sort out how much you should consider for each of these on gravel, I went to another brainiac, Ryan Cooper, the founder of Best Bike Split, a race optimization modeling software, guy who happens to have a PhD in optimization mathematics. He broke it down for us as to how these variables shake out on the gravel road. I asked Ryan how much aero matters versus rolling resistance when you're on gravel. His answer, as you may expect, was, well, it depends, but I'm going to put this answer up on the screen so you can really dig into what he has to say. He said at gravel race speeds, recreational gravel race speeds, mind you, getting a position from normal down to a great one could make as much as 1 mile an hour difference. Also, rolling resistance, noted here as CRR, plays a huge role. How big of a role? Well, it depends on the type of surface, right? Rolling resistance can be measured, noted here as CRR. Trick is what is measured in a lab and what is happening out on a dirt road are not often exactly the same. Ryan's advice here was to find the sweet spot of traction and comfort and speed in your tires, right? So by pumping up your tires higher, if you're just in a lab, that will reduce the rolling resistance. But if you're out on a bumpy road and your tire is not getting adequate traction, you are missing out on some of the watts. You're spinning of the pedals, making its way all the way to the ground. Again, your results may vary. But to dig back into that original question of how much aerodynamics versus rolling resistance matters for gravel, it's largely speed dependent. Yes, the surface, but let's focus on the speed. And Ryan's got a helpful rule of thumb here, which is 18 miles an hour is kind of the breaking point for all things being equal. When speeds get slower, it's a lot more of the rolling resistance and drivetrain efficiency. If you've got a mucky, muddy, rusted drivetrain, that's going to be a big problem. If you're pedaling through sand, you know this from being outside, that's where the majority of your power is going. It's just overcoming the surface. But at speeds at 18 and up, aerodynamics is a big thing. Speeds of 20 miles an hour, which is where I tested in the lab, that is where aerodynamics is the big thing. Not the only thing, but the big thing. I'll put a link below in the video description to Best Bike Split, where you can go and plug in some numbers and to a great podcast with Ryan so you can learn a little bit more about his background and his thinking about this type of stuff. Again, the big takeaways here for me, 18 miles an hour is for gravel, that tipping point of aerodynamics being the biggest thing versus it being one of the things. So just look back at some of your rides and speeds, and if you're riding at 14 miles an hour, don't sweat it so much. If you're trying to compete in some bike races and you're in that 19 to 20 to 21 average mile an hour range, this is something you should be thinking about. You probably already have an instinctual sense for some of this, right? When you're riding outside, when you're coasting downhill, you can feel how much a position change makes to your overall speed. Conversely, when you're climbing, grinding up a hill, it doesn't really matter if you're like right on the wheel, except for the psychological benefit of staying with people. Another cool tool I like that is perhaps not as sophisticated as Best Bike Split, but it's free, is gribble.org. There you can plug in different variables and see how much power is required at a certain speed. I really dig the slider where you can move that back and forth to a certain speed or a certain power and see how the math all shakes out. On the right-hand side, you plug in bike, rider, and weather parameters, and then you can use that sliding scale to see how much power is required by speed or vice versa. Now, there's a good chance you don't know your CDA for your gravel riding position. I'll give you my data and you can use that as a ballpark. You do know how a headwind feels though, right? So that's a fun number to play with. I should note, even if you're riding at 12 miles an hour, 13 miles an hour, where aerodynamics ostensibly doesn't play that big of a role, if you're riding into a headwind, you know that it does. So that's 13 miles an hour plus 10 miles an hour. Now we're looking at 23 total miles an hour, and guess what? Now aerodynamics is again the big thing you're fighting against. Two more links I'm going to point you to. One is at Zwift Insider. Eric's got some great information there. And one is the CRR data that the game uses for different bike setups on different services. Zwift, as you know, is a modeling software in many ways. You can see how fast a road tire is on the road and how fast a road tire is on gravel. Same, how fast a gravel tire is on pavement and how fast a gravel tire is on gravel. Now these are small numbers with lots of zeros, right? 0.004, 0.009. It's like old school Italian lira trying to figure out the math. But tweak those things just a little bit within Gribble or Best Bike Split and you can quickly see some pretty big differences. Now, lastly, the final tool I want to point y'all to is bicycle rolling resistance, where there is a huge amount of rolling resistance test data for various tires, both road and gravel. And helpfully, the CRRs are listed there for tires and then also a wattage cost for each. Note those wattage costs are for a single wheel, at the specified load and speed. But you can take those CRR numbers and plug them into the tools at Gribble or Best Bike Split and see how much that affects the total speed. Pretty cool stuff. Okay, now let's look at what the wind tunnel data had to say about going from wider bars to narrow bars and from shallower wheels to these deeper wheels. So 5 points of data I will pop up on the screen for you. There is grams of drag at 0 yaw, so just a dead-on headwind. The watts required at that 0 yaw. Grams of drag turned 2.5 degrees, and the watts required at 2.5 degrees. And then lastly, the CDA measured at that 2.5 degrees. Okay?
I'll run the wheels for you right now, just so you get a feel for what it's going to do. And then get to where you're comfortable in your body position, and then stop form when you're in a good body position, I guess. Yeah. Now can you sit up and go back? Can you hold that body position for 5 minutes? Yeah. Okay. Relax. So when we start, when we start the test, the wheels are going to go. Yeah. And go ahead. If it's easier for you to get into that position by pedaling, go ahead. When that green light comes on, that's when you want to make sure that you're stable and not putting a whole lot of input into the rig.
So our first set of measurements was the stock configuration with these 46 bars that flare out and these shallower wheels that are roughly 25 millimeters in rim height. For those, we got 2,096 grams drag or 184 watts at 0 degrees. And then at 2.5 degrees, that's a 187 watt cost. And my CDA there was measured at 0.426. If you're familiar with CDA numbers, you know that ain't good. Even for a larger fellow like myself, that's not a fast number. Next, we swapped out the bars. Thanks to Justin for helping me out with the quick bar switch. There, at 0 degrees, it was 174 watts, and at 2.5 degrees, 171 watts with a CDA of 0.391. Quick math, that's a savings of 16 watts and 0.035 CDA for just the bars alone. Again, this is measured at 20 miles an hour. If we were measuring at 30 miles an hour, 40 miles an hour, these numbers would quickly ramp up because drag goes up at the cube. Unlike rolling resistance, which is a more linear thing, with aero drag, it ramps up quite quickly. But again, I was trying to measure at what I felt is a reasonable speed for recreational gravel racing. So we swapped bars, now we're swapping wheels. It's not perfectly apples to apples. The tires are different, going from the stock Terravale Cannonballs to the new Gravel King X1s, but they measure pretty darn similar at, thank you, sir. These guys are just close to 42 measured width. These are labeled 42 and measure 42. So not perfectly scientific apples to apples, but what we're going for is that real world test of going from shallow to deep and from wide bars to narrow. And we'll see what the scientists in the lab coats inside the control room have to say. Not an actual scientist. Next, we left the skinny bars on and swapped in the deeper wheels. At 0 degrees, it was 164 watts, and at 2.5 degrees, it was 163 watts for a CDA of 0.373. There, the savings, 8 watts, measured at that 2.5 degrees, and a 0.018 gain in CDA, or a reduction, I should say, in CDA. So what does this mean? I'll give you a short answer and a long answer. Short answer is that narrower bars were faster than wider bars, and taller rims were faster than shallower rims. Duh, right? The longer answer is that the bars were twice the aerodynamic benefit that the wheels were. You can do your own cost analysis on that of how much it costs to swap in an aluminum bar, provided you don't have an integrated cockpit, versus switching over to some deeper carbon wheels. But it was a simpler, cheaper fix that made twice the difference. Obviously, the devil's in the details, and you could get well into the weeds about matching up certain tire profiles with certain rims and certain rim widths as well as depths. But just for ballpark comparison, taking 2 centimeters off each side of the handlebar was twice the aerodynamic benefit of adding 2 centimeters to the rim depth of either rim. Why was that? Well, it's because of us, right? It's not just the bike changing, but it's the fact that moving the bars moves the body, and the body is far and away the largest source of drag. Now, I and many others have done videos and articles on how just changing the bend in your elbow can make a huge aerodynamic benefit. By having your forearms parallel to the ground, they're reducing this cylindrical shape that's presented to the wind. So instead of this, you're doing this, and just like what you're seeing on the camera is reduced, what the wind is pressing against is reduced. And a similar thing is at play here when you're going from having the arms open to the arms slightly closed. That reduces the CDA and ramps up your speed for the same effort. Now here are 6 takeaways for me from this particular wind tunnel test. 1, narrow is still arrow, within reason, right? We're not gonna go Graham Obery Superman, but going from way out on the wind to a little bit in, just like Tom Bonin discovered before going to win Paris-Roubaix for the 4th time, narrower is a little bit arrower. I'm not going to go down to the 19 millimeter bars that Dylan had in the wind tunnel. Even the BMC Caius at 36, I've raced that. I won the 45 plus at Belgian Waffle Ride, Utah on that configuration. That still feels a little unnecessarily narrow for me. And while that probably would have tested faster, I like to balance a bit of comfort and steering confidence into the package. Takeaway number 2, aero wheels have a benefit, even at gravel race speeds. They're not as big of a deal as your body position though. Takeaway number 3, courtesy our man, Ryan Cooper. 18 miles an hour for gravel is a tipping point of sorts between aero being the big factor on gravel and aero being one of a few considerations for you. Takeaway number 4, wind speed. It's a real thing. With that 18 mile an hour tipping point, if you're thinking, you know what, I ride 12 or 13 miles an hour, this isn't relevant. It is if you only ride on a velodrome indoors where wind isn't a factor. If you go outside and the wind is blowing 10 or even 5 miles an hour, guess what? You're getting pushed up into the point where aerodynamics is the biggest factor opposed to your forward progress. Takeaway number 5, cycling remains a balancing act, whether that's just keeping the machine upright or trying to make decisions on optimizing from aerodynamics to flat protection to rolling resistance to body comfort to just how stuff looks. And that's part of the fun, right? Is playing with all the different variables, either in your head or getting out there and trying different things and seeing what works for you. And takeaway number 6, to answer the question at the top of the video, yes, going narrower on the bars was faster than going arrower on the wheels. To be clear, I'm not saying that 42 centimeters is the perfect handlebar width for everyone. Your stature and your preferences may well be quite different than mine, but hopefully this information and context may help you as you're making your own choices. Got some more wind tunnel testing videos coming up. Shaved my legs in the wind tunnel, because as you do. I tested Castelli's new Unlimited Pro jersey, which has an integrated hydration bladder built into it so you can ditch the vest. I tested that against a regular jersey. I tested it against a Usui pack, which I quite appreciate. And then I tested it against the Camelback Chase hydration pack. You may have seen Dylan's video from last year where he found that for him, having a Usui hydration pack on was faster than having no pack at all. That is not what I found, so you'll have to check that video out. That is one of the fun and often maddening things about testing in the wind tunnel, is that stock answers are seldom easy to come by, and small changes from one person to the next can be totally different. For instance, people will often want to know, what's the fastest helmet? What's the fastest bike? And it's like, well, it kind of depends on how it sits on you and the whole package of things. But I will share with you my data of those different packs, again, compared to this new Castelli jersey that forgoes a pack altogether. Another fun video we've got is testing some old school bikes. We've got an 82 Gitan, a 92 Le Monde, and then a 2022 Cervelo. We'll share that data coming up. And then to round out the wind tunnel testing collection, I've got a series of things I've learned in wind tunnels over the year. I've been to 7 or 8 around the world at this point, often with companies as they're testing particular things, trying to sell you the latest and greatest. And then sometimes it's fun projects like what we did with Silca, or what I've done with Bike Radar over the years, is going in and testing different things, like how much does handlebar tape affect speeds. And Dylan, of course, has some wind tunnel videos of his own coming up, so be sure to check those out. Thanks for subscribing, so you'll be sure to catch all these other wind tunnel videos coming up, and I hope you enjoy the ride. I didn't think this through here.